Okay, so I came across this really eye-opening observation from a guy in Pakistan, Murtaza, worked for a cigarette company.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
Well, he had this whole way of like categorizing social class based purely on how people bought their cigarettes. It was kind of wild.
Really? Just based on cigarettes?
Yeah, like if you walked or used a bike, you were probably buying the Explorer brand that
Yeah.
was seen as lower class.
Okay.
Then motorcycle meant you bought steel, that was lower middle class. A cheap car got you titanium, upper middle.
Let me guess. A fancy car for the top tier.
Exactly. A foreign car meant you were buying diamond, the elite.
Huh. That's quite a system. Give you a very specific, maybe commercially driven view of society, doesn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
And, the kicker, he himself preferred imported Marlboros.
Huh. So he didn't even fit his own top category perfectly.
Right. Kind of throws a wrench in his own hierarchy.
But it's a fascinating hook, though, how that everyday choice, buying smokes, can open up this whole discussion about, well, bigger things like class and elite.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're diving deep into today. We're looking at Rosita Armitage's book, Big Capital in an Unequal World, to really get under the skin of social class and the elite in Pakistan.
Yeah, it's a fantastic study. Goes way beyond simple definitions.
That's the plan. We want to explore, how this elite group actually formed, how they hold on to their power, the dynamics within the group.
Mhm.
It's complex,
And Armitage's approach gives us a great lens. It's ethnographic research.
meaning she spent a lot of time there, right,
Yeah.
talking to people.
Exactly. Years of observation, really detailed interviews with all sorts, businessmen, politicians, folks from old money families, new money families.
Wow.
Plus, she looked at media, legal documents. It's very grounded in real experiences.
So our mission here, for you listening, is to get a more, let's say, nuanced picture. How does wealth and power actually work among Pakistan's elite?
And looking at the differences within that elite group, too. It's not just one solid block.
Right. And the strategies they use, sometimes surprising ones, to stay on top, especially when you consider the inequality and, well, instability in the background.
We'll aim to pull out the key insights, keep it engaging, hopefully not too overwhelming.
Sound good? Ready to jump in?
Let's do it. So, first things first, how do we even define the elite here? Murtaza's cigarette brands give us one angle, very consumer-based.
Yeah, but that feels a bit simplistic, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Academics have other ways of looking at it.
for sure. You've got the Marxist view, focusing on who owns the means of production, the factories, the land.
And the Weberian approach.
Hmm.
That brings in status and other resources too, right? Not just economic stuff.
Precisely. Status, social connections, power. It shows right away there's no single easy definition.
And Armitage's research really highlights this complexity. She mentions someone, Abid, a successful businessman.
Yes, Abid, he considered himself super wealthy, definitely in the top 1% in Pakistan. But, and this is key, he told Armitage he wasn't part of the elite.
Whoa, okay, that's a huge distinction. So tons of money doesn't automatically equal elite status in his view?
Not in his view, no. For him, the real elite, the established ones, had specific characteristics.
Like what? What were his criteria?
Well, first, multi-generational wealth.
Yeah.
Money that went back, often linked to the British colonial regime or the very early days after Pakistan's independence.
So deep historical roots.
Exactly. He also pointed out they were often Punjabi, usually Western-educated, English-speaking, and generally less overtly religious than perhaps other segments of society.
And Abid didn't fit that mold.
He felt he didn't, primarily because his family's standing came from his grandfather being a respected religious scholar, and he was Pakhtun, not Punjabi. So despite his wealth, he felt outside those specific social circles.
So it's about heritage, culture, not just the bank balance. Armitage also spoke to Walid, right? From an old elite family.
Yes, Walid. And his perspective was quite different, almost paternalistic. He described elites as kind of chosen people.
Chosen people.
Wow. Yeah, with a sort of responsibility to guide society. He was actually quite critical of the nouveau riche, the newly wealthy.
Why? What was his issue with them?
He felt they lacked that sense of social responsibility, that duty to contribute that he believed the established elite possessed.
Interesting. So for the old guard, it's about more than just having money. It's about a certain code of conduct, a way of being.
Exactly. This idea of distinction is crucial for them. It's about your mannerisms, your lifestyle, the subtle signals you send. It's not just what you own, but how you live.
And this distinction helps them maintain their position, keep others out.
Precisely. It reinforces social boundaries. It's how they recognize each other and maintain exclusivity. That connection to the colonial past, the inherited status, that's the bedrock of what Armitage calls the established elite.
Okay, so this established group has deep roots. Let's unpack the history a bit. How did this first business elite actually come about?
Well, a lot of it traces back to the British colonial period. Supporting the regime was often the path to initial wealth.
I'll say.
Many Indian merchants, who later became Pakistani citizens, got their start supplying the British Army. Think about major events like the 1857 rebellion, the World Wars. Supplying the military was big business.
So their fortunes were literally built on contracts with the colonizers.
In many prominent cases, yes. Armitage cites Syed Babar Ali's family history as an example. They started by supplying the British Army in a specific cantonment and grew massively through those contracts.
That's a really direct link. What happened after independence? Did government policies play a role?
Absolutely. In the early years of Pakistan, things like unrestricted imports and, crucially, an overvalued Pakistani rupee really helped those who were already wealthy traders.
How did the overvalued rupee help?
It made importing machinery and raw materials much cheaper for them. So if you already had capital, you could expand your industrial base relatively easily.
And wasn't there something about trade with India being cut off?
Yes, that was a big moment. In 1949, Pakistan didn't devalue its currency along with Britain and India. India responded with a trade ban.
So suddenly, no more goods from India.
Right, which had been the main source for many products. This created a massive vacuum, a huge opportunity for those Pakistani industrialists who were already set up to step in and start producing those goods themselves.
So a political decision basically created a protected market for them.
In effect, yes. And personal connections became incredibly important then, too. Getting import licenses, permits, accessing government resources.
Required knowing the right people.
It certainly helped. Lobbying, personal petitions, socializing with officials, sometimes outright bribery. These were common ways to navigate the system. Armitage notes how Karachi got a disproportionate share of resources in the 50s, likely reflecting the influence of its business community.
What about the state-owned banks and development corporations? Were they involved?
Very much so. Institutions like PIDC and PIDC directed limited government funds. Business owners worked hard to cultivate relationships with the bureaucrats running these places.
To get loans and approvals.
Exactly. And also to ensure policies like import restrictions stayed in place, which kept domestic prices high and protected their profits.
Sounds like a system that really favored the insiders. Then came the Ayub Khan era in the 60s. Did things change much?
Some things did. Ayub's government eased some import restrictions, making it easier to get machinery, but importantly, they offered tax concessions to encourage investment in less developed parts of Punjab.
Ah, so that shifted the focus.
Yes, it really fueled the rise of a new group of large-scale industrialists from Punjab. So you saw a geographical shift in where the major economic power was concentrating.
But that period of growth also had its problems, didn't it? Like labor issues.
Definitely. By the late 1960s, inequality had grown, leading to significant labor unrest. Workers were demanding better conditions and wages.
How did the elite react?
The business elite pushed the government hard to clamp down, to ban strikes and protests. But despite that, labor movements, often allied with student groups, became more politically organized and effectively challenged both the government and the industrialists.
Then came a huge shock to the system. The loss of East Pakistan in 1971. What did that mean for the elite, especially those based in West Pakistan?
It was a massive blow for many. Families who had significant investments, factories, property in what became Bangladesh basically lost everything overnight.
Just like that. No compensation.
For the most part, no. Major industrial families like the Adamjis, Daywoods, Bhawanis, they controlled a huge chunk of East Pakistan's industry. The financial losses were enormous, a real shock.
A real shock indeed. And then, just a few years later, came Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and his nationalization program.
Yes, another seismic event for the established business elite. In the early 70s, Bhutto nationalized key industries: banking, insurance, manufacturing, shipping.
Pretty much took over the commanding heights of the economy.
That was the idea.
Yeah.
And it effectively wiped out huge portions of the wealth of many of Pakistan's most powerful business families. Some never really recovered.
That must have created incredible bitterness.
Oh, absolutely. A deep, lasting distrust between large parts of the business community and the state. And because Bhutto himself came from an elite landowning background, it felt like a betrayal to many of them.
But did this disruption create space for new players? You mentioned the idea of new money elites earlier.
It did, ironically. While devastating for many established families, nationalization combined with other factors did create openings. Families like the Sharifs are a key example.
Nawaz Sharif's family.
Yes. They came from a more middle-class background. Their steel business was also nationalized by Bhutto, which was a setback. But they later leveraged political connections and opportunities to build an enormous industrial and, of course, political empire.
So Bhutto's policies, in a way, reshuffled the deck, creating opportunities for some new entrants while hitting the old guard hard.
You could say that. It wasn't uniform in its impact. Then, when Zia-ul-Haq took power after Bhutto,
Did he try to reverse the nationalizations?
he did attempt some reprivatization, partly to win back the support of the industrialists and strengthen the military-business alliance, but it wasn't a complete reversal. And interestingly, Zia also increased some taxes and deregulated certain sectors, which actually annoyed some of the established elites who preferred the stability, even predictability, of the old protected system.
So it's never straightforward, is it? Always winners and losers, depending on the specific policy. What about the Musharraf era later on?
Musharraf's time, roughly the early 2000s, saw significant economic growth, and he was generally quite popular with the business community.
Why was that?
Well, the economy was doing better, there was more investment, and while he talked a good game about tackling corruption, there wasn't any serious effort to, say, increase taxes on the wealthy or corporations.
So good for business profits, maybe less so for broader inequality?
That's often the critique, yes. Growth happened, but wages for ordinary workers didn't necessarily keep pace.
Okay, so we have a sense of the historical ebb and flow, the rise and sometimes fall of different elite factions. But how do they maintain their status day to day, generation to generation? Armitage talks a lot about marriage and networks.
Yes, this is where the social fabric really comes into play. Building and maintaining alliances within the elite is absolutely critical, and marriage is a primary tool for that.
But not all elite families approach marriage the same way. You mentioned old money versus new money.
Right. There are often distinct strategies, the old money families, those with the long lineage we talked about.
The Kandani status.
Exactly. They place a huge emphasis on family history, those colonial-era connections. Education for them is often about social refinement, not just career prospects.
And how do they view the new money?
Often with a degree of skepticism, sometimes disdain. They might see them as lacking culture, being too flashy, too focused on just the money, maybe not understanding the subtleties of elite life.
We saw that play out in that Aitchison College incident Armitage described, didn't we?
Yes, that was a perfect illustration. Aitchison is this very prestigious old guard school in Lahore.
Like Eton in the UK, maybe.
Sort of, yeah. Very exclusive.
Yeah.
And when the chief minister of Punjab, who came from a new money background, tried to make the admissions process more merit-based and less about family ties.
The old guard pushed back.
Big time. The school board, mostly alumni from established families, actually fired the principal who was trying to implement the changes. It ended up in court. It just shows how fiercely they protect those traditional pathways and boundaries.
Wow, so schools become battlegrounds. What about social clubs? Are they similar gatekeepers?
Absolutely. Clubs like the Sindh Club in Karachi or the Lahore Gymkhana, getting membership isn't just about being rich.
What else do they look for?
The president of one club told Armitage they look at family background, reputation, social standing, even how you carry yourself, your body language. It's incredibly subjective.
And hard to fake, I imagine.
Very hard. Because the membership committees are drawn from the existing elite, someone almost always knows your family, your history. It's a tight circle.
So what do the new money families do? Are they just locked out?
Well, they often form their own clubs, places like the Royal Palm in Lahore, which might even have fancier facilities.
But do those clubs have the same cachet, the same networking power?
Not always. They might lack the deep connections to established political families or the heads of multinationals that you find in the older clubs. So while they create their own spaces, there's often still a desire among new money to gain entry into those older, more established institutions for the status and connections.
It sounds like a really complex social landscape. And women play a crucial role in navigating all this.
Immensely important. Armitage quotes one woman, Aliyah, who talks about the pressure on elite women to be socialites, to host events, and crucially, to make good marriages.
Good marriages meaning strategic alliances.
Pretty much. There's huge pressure to match impressive marriages within the family or social circle. It's seen as a way to cement ties between powerful families, enhance status, consolidate wealth and influence. It's often less about romance and more about strategy.
So what are the common patterns? Who marries whom?
Marrying within the extended family cousin marriage is still quite common, especially among established landowning or industrial families. It keeps the wealth and property consolidated.
That's the endogamy you mentioned.
Yes, or marrying within the same braderie, which is like a kinship group or clan or the same ethnic group that's very prevalent.
Are there exceptions? Marrying outside the usual circle?
Exceptions are made, but usually for strategic reasons. Marrying into families with strong military connections, for instance, can be seen as very advantageous for business families. Armitage gives the example of Arslan Afridi, who actively sought military connections through his children's marriages.
So marriage becomes a tool to link different pillars of power, business, and military.
Exactly. It weaves these networks together.
What happens if someone goes against the grain, chooses a love marriage that the family doesn't approve of?
The consequences can be quite severe socially and sometimes financially. Armitage mentions Imran from a big manufacturing family.
What happened to him?
He had a love marriage. His wife was wealthy, but not considered from the right kind of family, not the same social standing. He faced being sidelined in the family business, losing status within the family. It basically served as a warning to others.
A cautionary tale. Are there other taboos? What about religion?
Religious difference is a major barrier. Marrying someone from a different religious sect, or especially a different religion, is highly frowned upon, often forbidden.
Even if the person has all the other elite credentials.
Yes. Talat's story illustrates this. He was an Ahmadi, a part of a religious minority. Despite his wealth, education, and connections, his religious identity prevented him from marrying into an established Sunni Muslim elite family he was close to. It shows the hard lines that exist.
Okay, so marriage is key. What about less formal social interactions? Dinners, parties.
Hugely important. These aren't just casual get-togethers. Think of them as crucial forums for networking, sharing information, quiet lobbying.
Like Camille's dinners in Islamabad that Armitage describes.
Exactly. He'd host these bi-weekly dinners with a very carefully curated guest list. Top business people, politicians, bureaucrats, maybe senior journalists.
Why mix them all together?
It builds connections across different spheres of influence. It allows them to exchange information, build trust, maybe smooth over potential conflicts between, say, business interests and government policy. It's strategic socializing.
And these connections pay off in practical ways.
Absolutely. Knowing the right people can smooth the way for business deals, help resolve bureaucratic hurdles, provide a degree of protection. Abid's friendship with the police superintendent, for example, gave him visibility and helped sort out issues.
Is there a fine line between favors and, well, corruption?
That line can become very blurry, yes. Facilitation payments, gifts, leveraging relationships, it's often part of how business gets done within these networks.
And what about behavior that might be frowned upon by wider society? Like drinking alcohol, which is restricted in Pakistan, or mixing between unrelated men and women.
Within their own private gatherings, the elite often operate with a different, more relaxed set of social norms. They maintain a high degree of secrecy around these activities.
So a kind of selective morality, public versus private.
You could put it that way. The insulation of their social world allows them to maintain a certain public image while engaging in practices that might be criticized outside their circle. Self-regulation is key.
Right. So we've got history, marriage, networks. Armitage also discusses what she calls the culture of exemptions. What's that about?
This gets to how the elite interact with the state, with laws and regulations. There's often a perception that the state is unpredictable, inefficient, maybe even corrupt or immoral itself.
So they feel justified in finding ways around the rules.
To some extent, yes. They develop strategies to navigate or circumvent regulations they see as hindering their business or, frankly, their profit-making.
Like what kind of strategies?
Oh, things like using legal loopholes to delay court cases indefinitely, intensive lobbying for specific regulatory breaks, favorable SROs they're called, or even maintaining double accounting systems to hide income from the tax authorities.
A whole toolkit for getting around this system.
Mm-hmm.
The Afridi family, again, seems relevant here.
Yes, their story is quite illustrative. They had a long history of dealing with regulations, sometimes clashing with them, sometimes benefiting from things like amnesty schemes, where they could declare previously hidden foreign assets.
But it wasn't always smooth sailing for them.
No, they still faced corruption charges later on. It highlights the precarity. Even for powerful elites, things can change quickly depending on who's in government, how laws are interpreted or enforced. Business can feel quite insecure.
And didn't one of the Afridis have an interesting justification for forming a cartel?
Ah, yes, Shazar Afridi. His perspective was fascinating. He basically argued that forming a price-fixing cartel in his industry wasn't really wrong because the benefits, the profits went to people within his immediate community, his network, his peers.
Rather than benefiting outsiders or the state.
Exactly. His moral framework seemed centered on loyalty to his own group, his family, his social and ethnic circle, rather than adherence to abstract legal principles or broader societal good. It's a different way of looking at it.
A very different ethical calculus.
Mm.
What about the Karachi Stock Exchange case Armitage mentions? Did that also show this culture of exemptions?
Absolutely. That case was a classic example of what's called regulatory capture.
I mean, the regulators are basically controlled by the people they're supposed to regulate.
Precisely. The head of the SECP, the main financial regulator, was found to have financial interests in the very brokerage firms involved in the market manipulation he was supposed to be investigating.
Wow. Talk about conflict of interest.
It shows how state institutions themselves can be bent to serve elite interests. And when mid-level regulators actually tried to investigate corruption seriously, like in the OGRA energy scandal,
What happened to them?
they faced serious threats, harassment, even feared for their physical safety. It sends a chilling message.
So the law isn't always applied equally. Connections matter.
Connections matter hugely. The system can be manipulated if you have the power and the network.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. Based on Armitage's research, how does elite power actually work and sustain itself in Pakistan? What are the main takeaways for you?
Well, I think the first thing is that it's a combination of factors. Economic capital, having money, is obviously fundamental. You can't be elite without it.
But it's not just about the money.
No, definitely not. Those social networks built through generations, cemented by strategic marriages, maintained through constant socializing and mutual support, that social capital is just as vital.
And then there's their ability to navigate the state.
Yes, that culture of exemptions. Knowing how to work the system, bend the rules, lobby effectively, sometimes ignore the law. That's a key skill.
And that idea of distinction, the cultural capital, helps keep the circle closed, right?
Absolutely. Taste, manners, lifestyle. These act as powerful boundary markers, making it harder for outsiders, even wealthy ones, to just buy their way in. It reinforces their exclusivity.
It seems incredibly interconnected. Alliances bridging business, politics, the military.
Exactly. These intra-elite alliances are crucial for managing potential conflicts and presenting a more or less united front when necessary. It creates resilience.
And it's interesting how they view inequality itself.
Yes, there's often a tendency to blame external factors, the state, corruption elsewhere, global forces, while simultaneously benefiting enormously from the existing structures that produce that inequality.
So wrapping up our deep dive today, using Rosita Armitage's work as our guide, we've seen the Pakistani elite isn't some monolithic block. It's complex, dynamic, with deep historical roots.
Marked by internal distinctions, like old versus new money, but united by sophisticated strategies for holding on to power.
And it takes more than just wealth. Social capital, those strategic alliances, knowing how to play the game with the state, those are just as crucial in this unequal world Armitage describes.
It really paints a picture of how power operates, not just through formal institutions, but through these intricate social and cultural webs.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. Given how deeply interconnected and historically resilient Pakistan's elite seems to be, what could actually shift these dynamics?
Yeah, could future political changes or economic shocks fundamentally alter how this group operates and relates to the rest of society? Or are these structures just too entrenched? Is real upward mobility, breaking into these circles from the outside, genuinely possible on a larger scale?
Definitely something to ponder. A lot to think about there.